You are watching Conscious Evolution with Wes Heffernan.
Concept of growing, what does that really mean, right? As far as, here's where I am and here's where I want to go. In order to get there, you have to take this journey, right? And along the way, you're going to have experiences. Well, if here's who you are now and here is the next greatest expression that you can imagine or want to experience, then this person, this play, you're going to need to be more than who you are in this moment in order to experience this. So you have to add something to yourself, right? You have to add mass. And while I'm not speaking on the terms of the physical world of atoms, I'm speaking in terms of the metaphysical world of information. And so
to get to the next milestone.
Right, like, so it's growth. Again, I'm gonna skip and I'm gonna bring in, it's the concept of a black hole, right? And so if you have a zero plane of a horizon and there's no mass anywhere, it's really one-dimensional. I mean, technically, if you take the observer perspective, it would be two-dimensional, but there's the thickness of nothing, right? Because there's no zero mass. Now, if you add not enough mass to say I have something, but if you add just, let's say, the idea of mass, right? Like potential mass, the potential of mass, right? And you add it to this plane, well, it's not enough to pull that plane down to be something, but it's enough to create an unstable ocean, like water, right? It's now, instead of it being a mirror, it has a tiny bit of ripple in it because there's this something. It's nothing yet, right? But there's the potential for something that exists on this plane. And so now going to like what a black hole, the concept of a black hole and how it works. So as that something adds a little more mass, it has a little more time to experience a little bit more of itself, right? Maybe it's from the perspective of what it is, maybe it's from the perspective of what it's not. It doesn't matter, both are information. And so after a cycle, it adds a little something and it becomes a little bit more. And so it falls from that plane of zero a little bit more. And eventually it adds enough to hit this marker, this point, this barrier, the structure, right? Chapter 3 was form, structure. We didn't hit on a lot of that. We're going to do that once I get my board and can kind of start drawing and whatnot. I'm excited about that. I am. But anyway, so eventually it hits this point in the process where there's a boundary, and that boundary has to be fulfilled in order to become, like, to be able to move around just as it was as a possible something. Now it's moving around as a thing in this environment that has a boundary that will allow it to be hydrogen and helium, if we want to bring in chemistry again, right? But hydrogen has to be compressed enough to become helium, and then through the process of fusion and compressing helium, you create carbon, right? And so, and as you go in chemistry, you create boundaries, right? These are the same boundaries as I'm speaking to. This is just them presenting themselves in chemistry, but these same boundaries are present wherever, right? And it's in the space. It's in these spaces between those boundaries where everything has the fluctuation to be and exist and live. And there's multiple, I'm referring to them as octaves, so there's multiple octaves. And the octaves represent the space between each one of those boundaries. Okay. All right. And so, what I'm attempting to do with the Rockman universe, with Conscious Evolution, and with this story in particular, A Journey into the Abyss, is to kind of pull back a little bit the curtain on that structure, one, but on that process too, because it's really both the process and the structure. If you can go back to where it's just the Trinity, and you can spend, I've spent 12, 13, 14, 15 years just with the Trinity, right? And the 1 to 3, that one step. How do you go from 1 to 3? That one step. I've spent, a lot of time right there.
And these are the steps in between the octaves.
Correct. And with the sacred geometry, you're kind of getting the geometrical depiction of those octaves, right, as the 5 platonic solids. And music is a really great way to show exactly like what I'm talking about, because we're using the terms octaves and keys, and like a piano tells a story. You know, you look at the space between the bass clef and the treble clef, and there's this, whether it's, I've seen it two ways, right? I've seen it compressed, where there's three notes that overlap, but the center one is the C, and I've seen it where it's not compressed and where C is still the center, but right. So I'm not exactly, I need to do some more pondering on the music, and I actually have kind of reached out to some in our groups that we discuss, and like, listen, I've been, my internal dialogue has been telling me to look here and pointing me at this. I was just like, what can y'all, you know, that are into music and into music
How many
theory?
people in this group?
It's not, I don't even know really, but it's, and when I say group, I mean that really loosely. Like, I mean, sometimes it might be on Facebook, sometimes it might be a phone call, sometimes it might be somebody I've met on a plane ride, that, right? So like, it's just this really loose group. Fold this point back in, which is one of the points of what we're doing, is trying to create a space where this loosely knit group can kind of begin to feel the gravity of the time and period and situation that we're in, and coalescing. And I mean, and it's not, it's a natural process, right? It's not like anybody has to do anything other than accept their role. And that's, you know, we were talking about standing up, you know, that 90-degree turn, right? Either that's accepting your role, and once you do that, there's just, you know, finding your place is next, and that's a process. Sure, that's what I can speak directly to, but you know, going back to where we were starting, like how amazingly grateful I am, and that I am for the environment that I was raised in, that allowed me to move through that really, you know, sponge period of time, adolescence, in a way, that, you know, protected me in the sense of having to experience in any way, shape, fashion, or form, like the animalistic survival thing, right? There was never a concern in that house about the next meal or the biggest thing was like, where are we going on vacation this summer? What do you want to do this weekend? Like, you know, it was utterly amazing, and I don't think I've given enough, up until recently, given enough credit to that.
And sometimes it's when you are a little older that you realize it.
I mean, even when I realized it, I didn't, right? Like, it really took me explaining to Taylor something that, like, brought to life how grateful I am for that. But it made something else make a lot of sense. And we're going back to the internal dialogue. Something else that I was learning, being shown, I guess, was that, you know, because of, and you know, this is me looking back at the last 5 months, but because of the fact of how I was raised and brought up, and because of the fact that I didn't have to struggle through survival mode, even when I, you know, metamorphosized into an adult and went out on my own, during that transitional period, I knew if I needed help, it was there. So even in my leaving the nest and going out, there wasn't, you know, like, let me go do it.
You needed to.
Right, like, failure wasn't something, it wasn't that success was drilled into me, but it was that failure was not.
Right.
Right.
And there was no fear of it.
And so I did, later in life, get the success driven into me by my baseball coach, by my uncle, by my dad in some ways, right? And so I did have that, but that wasn't until after I had coalesced those first, you know, specifically those first 7 and those first 12, that first masculine and feminine cycle, in a way that allowed me to go into those experiences with a really good relationship with myself, my internal dialogue, right? Which then, this is where we're kind of getting into what I realized we really diverge from the ocean, is that I wasn't getting beat up by my dialogue, right? My dialogue was my source of love and compassion while I was getting beat up by the baseball coach and by my dad and by my uncle. And I mean that in the nicest way, right? Coaching, right? Like, you.
Thanks for watching. Join us next time on Conscious Evolution. Don't forget to subscribe.